So I want to speak about, as Mike just did, about growing. And I want to begin with two quotes from Ernest Holmes. And the first one actually is an affirmation. And he wrote, "Learn to see through confusion into peace, to see through sickness into health, to see through poverty into success and abundance, to believe in the all-sustaining good. Learn to trust in God and be at peace." And then he wrote in I believe I found this in the textbook. He said, "Many people naturally ask, if God is good, if God is love, if God is peace, why all this confusion?" And his answer to it is, don't you think that even God could not have done it any other way? Can't you see that even the divine will, by ordaining man's destiny, was compelled to let man work out his own future? So, to me, particularly that last quote, what it says to me that in the end, it all comes down to you and me and the choices that we make in our lives. And so, some of us stay in relationships that aren't very good. And some of us stay in jobs that aren't very satisfying. And all kinds of other situations. And most of us do it because that's what's comfortable. It's easier than dealing with change. And Michael Singer, in his book, The Untethered Soul, put it really wonderfully. He said, one of the requirements for true spiritual growth and deep personal transformation is coming to peace with pain. And the message is, it's not easy. It's not easy to walk the spiritual path. It's not easy to give up what's comfortable. It's not easy to go out of your comfort zone, to come face to face with fear. And it involves challenging what's familiar to us. It's questioning our needs for safety, our need for control, our need for comfort. And those can be really painful experiences. There's a movie, probably most of you have seen the movie Defending Your Life with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. Anybody see that movie? Nobody? Oh, it's really good. I knew Andrew would have seen it. He could probably repeat all the dialogue from start to finish. But in that movie, what happens is when people die, they go to some place where they're put on trial. And they're not put on trial to see if they've lived a good life or not such a good life. They're put on trial to see if they learned how to overcome fear in this lifetime. And if they didn't learn how to overcome fear in this lifetime, they get reincarnated to come back and see if they can learn it the next time. And if they did learn what fear was all about, they go on to another place. So if you haven't seen it, it's really funny. It's a love story between Brooks and Meryl Streep because he loves her. She gets to go on, and there's some doubt about him. I'll let you watch it and see what happens. So in our book groups, one book that we read, I think it was about a year ago, was Spiritual Liberation by Michael Bernard Beckwith. And in there he says, so many people believe that a challenge-free life, a life with no challenges, that's what a happy life is all about. And he said, but that's not true. It's the challenges in our lifetime that stimulate our growth and stimulate our development. That being alive, walking this earth and being alive means welcoming challenges. I know it's easy to stand up here and say that, and I'm sure it was very easy for him to type it out. And it's not so easy to do. I know that. Becky and I were talking about it on the way here this morning, that it's not easy to open yourself up and welcome a challenge. But if we can get to a place where we can do that, we can come to see a higher vision for our life, because those challenges show us really how strong we are when we maybe didn't think we were that strong, and transcending the resistance to challenges, that is what's really spiritually liberating. One of the books that we use to train practitioners is called Real Moments by Barbara DeAngelis. And she has a quote in there I absolutely love. She said, "At the end of our time on earth, if we have lived fully, we'll not be able to say, 'I was always happy.' Hopefully, we'll be able to say, 'I have experienced a lifetime of real moments, and many of them were happy moments.'" So now I struck out on the movie, but how many people here know who Ram Dass is? Everybody know who Ram? Okay. So Ram Dass is a great spiritual teacher, and I'm not sure how many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, he had a debilitating stroke. And he went through a really difficult time dealing with that. And he wrote a book called Still Here. And in the book, he talks about it. And he said, I had this stroke, and all my life, I've been a helper. I even co-authored a book called How Can I Help? And he said, and now, all of a sudden, I need to accept the help of other people. And he talked about how in his 60s even, what his mental image of himself was. He was so vibrant, and he would swim, and he had an MG that he would, tool around in. And he said, I had this one image, and then boom, I get this stroke. And it totally changed his perception of who he was, his ego. His self-image just was destroyed initially. And he said now he's at a place where he's taking his healing back on himself. And he said, healing isn't curing. Healing doesn't mean that you go back to the way things were. What healing is, it means dealing with what is now and moving closer to God. Dealing with what is now and moving closer to God. And when I read that, it brought me back to the first times Becky and I went to a Church of Religious Science. And we started out, and I know a lot of you know this, in the Huntington Beach Church in Huntington Beach, California. And the minister was a lady named Peggy Bassett, and she was an incredible woman. And she got Lou Gehrig's disease. And she wrote this wonderful article. I've shared it with some people because what happened is that she started this church literally in her living room, just like Michael Beckwith started Agape. And it grew so big. By the time Becky and I got there, there were 4,000 or 5,000 people that were attending on a Sunday, and she had several services. Anyway, she gets Lou Gehrig's disease, and the church, people started to leave the church because they said, wow, if she can't cure herself, what good is what she's doing? How is she going to cure anybody else if she can't be a healer for herself? And she wrote this wonderful article in Science of Mind magazine, and she said, you know what? Don't pray for me to be cured. I don't need that. Don't do it. She said, pray for me to just be able to deal with what's in front of me. And she said, my entire life, I have prayed for a closer walk with God. And I was always too busy to take it. Now I'm not. Now I'm being able to do what I have always wanted. And I think that example is what Ram Dass was talking about, healing, being able to deal with what is and allowing it to move you closer to God. That's exactly what Peggy Bassett said to people. This is my opportunity to take a closer walk. So, you want to pray for me to get better, you can, but that's not what I'm asking. It's a great article. If anybody's interested, I'll be glad to share it with you. In that book that I told you that Barbara DeAngelis wrote, she has a great quote from Mary Tyler Moore, who herself has undergone a lot of difficult moments. And Mary Tyler Moore said, you can't be brave if you've only had wonderful things happen to you. So I want to tell you a fable, and it's really interesting. I couldn't find it initially, so I went online. I've read it, and there are so many versions. It's the same fable, but some places Hindus take it, some places Buddhists say it's a Buddhist. Anyway, it's a story about two gods, a husband and wife, looking down on earth, and they see a beggar who really needs a lot of help. And it touches the woman's heart, and she turns to her husband and says, throw him down a bag of gold. And the husband says, no, he's not ready for it. And the wife keeps pleading with him to do it. And he finally, I guess to keep the peace, says, okay. So he drops a bag of gold on the beggar's path. Now the beggar is walking along his path thinking how hungry he is, and I wonder where I'm going to get my next meal. And he turns a corner and he sees something in the middle of the road, and he says, oh, wow, I'm so glad I saw that. I could have hit it with my toe and hurt myself, or I could have tripped over it. And he casually walks around the bag of gold and continues down his path. And the husband says to the wife, see, the moral of the story is that sometimes what we wish to avoid is just a gift from God. So I want to read something from a book called Conquering Fear by Harold Kushner, but I have to tell you something that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. But he talks in this book, and which what I'm going to read. He was asked to give a talk at a synagogue in where is it again, Beck? I just went totally blank, and I don't want to have to. In the Virgin Islands, I'm sorry, in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. And the factoid that I was going to tell you that has nothing to do with anything, it's the second oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere, in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands. And the oldest one is in Curacao. Who would have ever thought that? Well, anyway, he was asked, the reason he was asked to speak there, it was a bicentennial, I think, and it was started in the 1700s, and his family came from Lithuania and settled in the Virgin Islands, some of his relatives, and they were big givers and doers in the synagogue. Well, he got this invitation, but after he received it, by the time he got to speak, there was a huge hurricane that hit St. Thomas, and almost half the homes in St. Thomas were destroyed. And they went months and months with no electricity and no water. And he realized he couldn't give the talk that he wanted to give. And so one of the things he did, he quoted from the Bible, from chapter 19 of the book of Kings. And here's the quote. There was a mighty wind splitting mountains and shattering rocks, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. And what Kushner said is, what got him in that reading was that the Lord wasn't in the wind and wasn't in the fire and wasn't in the hurricane. And so he said, so if God wasn't there, where do you find God? And he said, for him, God is found in the response. God is found in what we do after a tragedy or after an ordeal hits us. That God is in the way we respond. That still, small voice, he said, that calls us to be all that we can be when times get tough. He said, nature has no choice. It can only follow built-in laws. But human beings, we have a choice on how we can respond. And he said, he learned that from Viktor Frankl, that we can't control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond to what happens to us. So another rabbi that I really like a lot, and like his readings, is a rabbi named Erwin Kula. And in one of his books, he said, the process of life is circuitous. Life has no easy straight lines or easy paths. And he said, yet it's amazing to him how we try to make it have straight lines and easy paths, how we do everything we can do, try to control, and we can't. And he said, and it's so interesting, because when we look back on the tough times, we can always see that wherever the tough times led us, it was necessary for us to go there. And it shows us that life really does have a purpose, and that the sages teach us that every moment, no matter what's going on in our life, every moment has the possibility of being a holy moment. But sometimes, some ways, we don't get it. We don't see it, and we let them pass us by. So I want to tell you a story, and I haven't ever done this story here, because the last time I did it, Becky said to me, that was the longest story I've ever heard in my whole life, and you even lost me, so imagine how many other people you did. So I never did it again, and I told her yesterday, I said, God, that story would really work. And she said, well, maybe you could shorten it a little. So I'm going to shorten it a little. So it's a story about a young woman who's from Morocco, and her dad is a spinner, and he's very, not the singing group, he's a spinner. He does that to make a living, and he's very successful at it and very wealthy. And he asks her to go on a trip with him. He's going to sell some of his wares, and he said, why don't you come with me? We'll take a ship together, we'll have a good time, and look around and see if you could find a guy who looks good, like he'd make you a good husband. So she goes on the trip with him, and a storm hits, and the boat sinks, and her dad is killed. And now this is a fable, okay? She's washed up on shore, and she wanders around for a little bit, and then she's picked up by a family of weavers. And the weavers take her in, and they teach her weaving. And she lives with them for 4 or 5 years, and one day she's walking along the beach, and a group of pirates kidnaps her and sells her into slavery. And the person that buys her is a person who makes ships' masts. And he actually buys her to work with his wife, but somehow he loses money. He was going to buy several slaves that day, and he can't afford to buy the men to help him, so he teaches her how to make ships' masts. And she's so good at it and so diligent that he gives her freedom and makes her a partner in the business. And he's going to go on a trip to Java, and he asks her if she'd come with him to help him do some marketing. She agrees to do it. The ship, too, is hit with a storm, goes down, he dies, and she's washed ashore. And when she gets on the beach, she screams to herself, why do bad things always happen to me? Now, at the same time, in China, there's a belief in China that a foreign woman is going to make a tent for the emperor, because nobody in China knows how to make a tent. And somehow she comes before the emperor, and he asks her if she can do it, and she said, I think I can. So she asks for some rope, and they don't have the rope she needs, and she remembers her days as a spinner, so she asks for some silk. They give her the silk, and she spins the silk into rope. And then she asks for some heavy material, and they don't have the kind of material she needs, and she remembers her days as a weaver, and so she weaves whatever they have into the kind of material she needs for a tent. And then she asks them for poles, big poles, and they don't have any. She remembers her time working for the fellow who made the ship's mast, and she has him cut down trees, and she makes the poles that she needs, and then she puts the tent together. And everybody's thrilled, and of course she marries a handsome prince, and she lives to a ripe old age. The point of the story is that at some point she goes and looks back on her life, and she realizes that all the adventures that she had, everything that happened to her that seemed so terrible when it happened, were necessary for her ultimate happiness. All of them. And she could see in hindsight, she saw the magic in all of the dreadful circumstances that she encountered, and she was able to see the perfection in the grand scheme of things. So I want to end with something from a book called Inspired and Unstoppable by Tama Kieves. And in it, she relates, she took skiing instruction one time, and the skier said that the instructor, who was a beginner's class, he said, you have to learn how to fall before you can fly. And Tama didn't like that, so she tried not to fall. She kept herself very stiff and and tried not to fall. And she realized that she was falling more than all the other people in the class, and they were getting by her because she was resisting. And she said that she learned from there that it's the same in life, that we have to learn how to fall in order to get up. And she said she really loved, there's a Japanese definition of success, and the definition is fall down 7 times, get up 8 times. And what she did, and this is what I want to close with, she went and wrote to herself. She calls it her permission to dare, permission to dare. And she wrote, I am willing to respect and advocate myself, no matter how my work is initially received. I know I will grow in strength, clarity, and magnetism as I go along. I am willing to focus on all that is going right, explore more of what is going right, and talk a lot about what is going right. So much is going right. I am willing to partner with a dynamic, intelligent force that I do not control. I am willing to recognize that I do not know how or when my destiny needs to unfold. I am willing to give things breathing room and know that nothing can stop the power of my soul aligned with the power of a brilliant universe. I am willing to remember that every disappointment is a misperception and is nothing compared to the trauma of not daring my dreams at all. I am a huge success already because I am on this path, dedicated to this evolution, growing continuously, giving myself more love, and moving in the right direction. I am succeeding just by being on this journey. So thank you all for being here. God bless you. Have a great week. And we're going to hear another song by Michael Godd, right?